So for this dish, we are starting off with some frozen basa fillets. I think it's about 400 grams or so. And then we're going to use ginger puree. Honestly, this stuff is so good. And some light soy sauce. You can swap that for dark soy if that's what you've got. Gonna just use basically any potatoes that you've got. I think those are on offer. So we're going to chop them nice and small and flavour them with a homemade ranch dressing made from cider vinegar, as shown here, and some light mayo. Again, standard mayo will work, of course. So we've got some mixed herbs and some garlic powder, and of course salt and pepper, which we're going to use in that ranch dressing. We're going to take some pretty standard boring greens. We've got some spring greens that are already cut up and a courgette. But the first thing we're going to do is get that oven on to about 200 degrees. The basa will need as much time as possible to cook if we're going to try and get this done in 20 minutes. And of course, get that kettle on. So just taking the basa fillets out, we're just going to chuck those straight into a foil-lined baking tray. Now you don't need to worry about adding any oil to the tray. They won't stick because the basa is going to release a little bit of water because it's a frozen fish once it starts to bake, so it will sort of unstick itself. So next up, we're making the marinade. So we're going to use a generous squeeze of the ginger puree. Remember, we need to cover the entirety of those two fillets if possible. So it's probably 2 to 3 teaspoons of the ginger puree. If you want it stronger, you can add more. If you want to start off a little bit weaker with the flavouring, then you can just add a little bit less. And then we're roughly half covering that with soy sauce in a little ramekin. Then we're going to combine those until we have a nice smooth consistency that will be nice and easy to spread over the fish. So I'm just using the teaspoon here. I'm basically drizzling that marinade directly over the fish. You don't have to worry about, preparing this hours and hours in advance. This will impart a good level of flavour straight away without lots of time. So I'm just going to chuck that in the preheated oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. So next up, the potatoes. We're going to use a fair few potatoes because we want a few left over for tomorrow's dinner, where we're going to be making a frittata using the leftover potatoes and green vegetables. So with the potatoes, just give them a quick scrub and then chop off any sort of bits on the ends that we don't want to use, and try and decide which pan to go for. We're going to go for that pan. Brilliant. And then roughly chopping up, we're not trying to be too fancy here, 4/4 of the potato at once. That's just a little hack to save a little bit of time. Rather than chopping them one at a time, you can do 4, and obviously that will save you some time. So cover those with some boiling water, get those on to boil, and of course chuck a lid on it. That will help speed things up. Now because they're chopped up pretty small, they're going to cook pretty quickly, so we can crack on with the rest of the preparation. About half the bag of spring greens at a time. We're going to empty those into the colander to give us enough chance to wash those through nice and thoroughly. And you're going to want to make sure to remove any thick stalk bits. I'm going to show you one shortly. There we go. Because they're going to cook at a different rate than the rest of the leaves. And obviously you don't want crunchy spring green stalk in with the rest of your dish. So once those are all done, you can just chuck those into the large pan. Now they will probably overflow, but don't worry, because as soon as you add on the boiling water, they're going to start to wilt down. And of course you can also give that a prod with your wooden spoon to just make sure that everything fits nicely within the pan. So of course put a lid on it because that's going to speed things up, and then we're going to prepare the courgette. So we're just going to give it a quick wash and top and tail, take off the ends, and then cut down lengthways. Now the courgette will cook very quickly. You see how it's opaque at this stage? Once it's been in boiling water for maybe 1 to 2 minutes, it will start to go translucent, and that's when you know it's cooked, and it will start to have a bit of a texture change, a slightly more mushy texture. So we're going to make the ranch dressing. We're going to add about 2 teaspoons of light mayonnaise, and then we're mixing that with some cider vinegar, some mixed herbs, and as much garlic powder as you, or should I say maybe your significant other, can handle. And so just, do that to taste. Of course, once we've shaken this all up, you will be able to have a taste of that, and you can edit any of the flavors you so desire We're of course seasoning with salt and pepper. We used about half a teaspoon of the cider vinegar, but we can add a little bit more if you like that vinegary taste. And then really important, add a little bit of water just to thin it out a little bit, because otherwise it can be too thick and it won't really mix properly. So make sure the lid is on nice and tight. Then you're going to just shake that for about 15-20 seconds to make sure that's all nice and mixed. And then you will have the texture as desired there. Make sure to give it a taste, and if it's really that good, give it a massive thumbs up. So 2 minutes before the greens are ready, we're going to chuck in the courgette. So as I mentioned, this only takes a couple of minutes to cook through. You're going to want to stir that in and just keep a real eye on that, because that won't take long to do. You want to watch from the opaque colour to going through to a translucent and slightly mushier, slightly softer texture. So we're going to drain the potatoes and just return them to the pan. I'm going to serve them straight from the pan. Now, when you're draining the spring greens, it's really important to make sure you get as much water off as possible. So I shake these really vigorously using the colander, but you can also use a wooden spoon to push down and just compress out all that water that is held within the greens, because there's nothing worse than serving up and having a big pile of water on your dish. It can just ruin it and dilute the flavours of the dish that you've worked so hard to create. So we're going to take the basa out of the oven. You can see we've got the colour of the soy sauce and the ginger. You can probably just take roughly a fillet each if you're feeling quite hungry. Next up with the greens, I recommend going pretty generous with the greens. Honestly, when you add the ranch dressing, it's a complete revelation. You know, if you hated greens before, try it with a simple sauce like we've made today. And it'll just transform things. Hopefully you find your kids will just be munching away at those greens like they've never done before. So you can use a teaspoon to drizzle that over, or if you're feeling a little bit more indulgent, of course you can just pour that straight on. But I do recommend you give that a go. Those flavours there, you're taking 3 or 4 really quite boring ingredients and just ramping up the flavour using a few simple ingredients that you probably have in the cupboard anyway. So we're all plated up, and I hope you enjoy that as much as I do. Thanks.